Here's the New York Times headline from just a few hours ago. Another provocative flag was flown at another Alito home. Photographs obtained by the Times on 4 separate dates show that the Appeal to Heaven flag was flown over the New Jersey vacation home of Supreme Court Justice Samuel Alito in the summer of 2023. Michelle, what was your reaction when you saw this headline?
I mean, on the one hand, completely predictable, right? Justice Alito is exactly the person that a lot of us
fly one flag, fly another flag.
Right. And he is, I mean, my colleague Jamelle Bouie wrote this column about how he's a true believer, right? He's not a Fox News producer. He's a Fox News watcher. He's, he has kind of very similar opinions, I think, to a lot of other crankish men in their 70s. He just happens to have lifetime unaccountable power over the Constitution of the United States and has been extremely contemptuous of any efforts to not just rein in that power, but to enact a code of ethics, on the Supreme Court. It's worth pointing out that the Supreme Court just under, pressure, just adopted a code of ethics that said that justices should recuse themselves. I don't know if I'm going to get the language exactly right, but I think when it can be reasonably inferred, yes, that when there might be reasonable doubts about their impartiality, something to that effect. How can anyone reasonably believe that Justice Alito is remotely capable of being impartial on around a cause that he cannot resist, that he feels so strongly about, that he cannot restrain himself from, flying banners over multiple properties?
Mark, Justice Alito's wife was blamed for the first flag incident. I thought it was very telling that the justice had nothing to say to the New York Times when asked for comment. What is your sort of immediate assessment of how damaging this is to the court?
I think the justice was caught red-handed on this one, is not going to be able to shove off blame to his wife. My immediate reaction is that this is, of course, a terrible look for Alito, a terrible look for the Supreme Court, on the eve of yet another day when the justices will be handing down opinions. Tomorrow morning at 10 a.m., we will be getting major opinions in cases that could involve things like abortion and gun control, and Alito may well be providing the deciding vote in some of those cases. And the nation will now know that the guy who tipped the scales one way or the other in some of those cases also flew a flag intimately associated with the insurrection at his beach house. But I just want to say, I feel like what's so damning here is that Justice Alito has clearly broken the sort of implicit contract that the Supreme Court makes with the United States of America and its citizenry. The Supreme Court justices are supposed to act with dignity and honor and impartiality, not just because they derive their legitimacy from all of that, from their black robes, the simple black robes that show they're just normal judges dispensing justice, but because when they go badly awry, we can't do anything about it. We can't vote them out of office. We can't recall them. There's virtually nothing that the American people can do about a justice who's gone as lawless and rogue as Sam Alito evidently has. And so it almost sort of, it can be compared to the British monarchy. The reason that it still exists in its current form is because Queen Elizabeth was able to preserve this image of integrity and decency for so long, and the public respected it. Alito is shattering those efforts by the rest of the Supreme Court, or some of the rest of the Supreme Court. It's not going to lead to a good place for them because, again, that really is the only place they derive their power from. They don't have an army to enforce their decisions. When they lose respect, they lose authority.
Yeah, that's such a good point, Mark. I mean, it almost feels like he's doing it because he can, because he knows that there is no accountability.
Right.
It is owning the libs in the most spectacular fashion.
Right. I mean, it's like, who's going to stop me? I mean, I noticed that two of the things that Mark said, he talked about the implicit bargain that the Supreme Court has with the United States, but with the American people. But part of Trumpism has always been to disregard all of those implicit bargains, right? All of those norms. It's always been, who's going to stop me? And so, Justice Alito clearly could care less about whether his exercise of power is seen as legitimate in the eyes of people who disagree with him. And I think that is where it ties in. Justice Alito is a Catholic. The New Apostolic Reformation is a kind of species of Pentecostalism. But in as much as they see a kind of right to rule for certain citizens with certain beliefs and a kind of, a lesser sort of citizenship for everyone else, I think it very much fits in with this. Who cares? It doesn't matter if you think I'm fair or just or my authority is well exercised. I have it, you don't.
Yeah, not even trying to cloak it in some other sort of broader notion of jurisprudence. Mark, the assumption at this current hour is that not much can be done about this. We know that Chuck Schumer, I believe this was earlier today, before this New York Times story broke, suggested that, that he is discussing where to go from here with Senator Dick Durbin, who is the chair of the Senate Judiciary Committee. But practically speaking, I mean, all roads lead to John Roberts. If anything is meaningful is actually going to be done, or do you think Congress can enact something? And I say that with an eye roll, not intentionally, but reflexively.
Well, I know some House Democrats are saying if they take back a majority that they will hold hearings on this, they will investigate. I think that is a positive step for anyone who wants accountability here. I think it's very unfortunate when senators on the Democratic side say, well, we won't really be doing anything about this because we don't have any meaningful options. They'll ignore our subpoenas. They'll laugh in our faces. That only feeds into this arrogance that Justice Alito is riding high on right now. This sense, as Michelle noted, that he is above everything and that he's able to flaunt it. It's in our faces. Justice Alito is very cloistered. He does not have anyone in his circle to puncture this sense that he is above all public criticism and equal to Trump in the sense that no one can stop him because he has this sort of unlimited power. And I think that if Democrats don't even bother to try to puncture that sense of immunity that he has, if Democrats just give up and say, well, we tried a few subpoenas, they ignored them, so what can we do now? That's going to get Alito even further to the right. It's going to push him to new extremes, or at least allow him to reach those extremes within his bubble. And that is going to come out in his decisions. We are watching his decisions become increasingly unhinged. His questions from the bench are deranged at this point. His opinions are infused with radical Christian nationalism. If all Democrats can muster in a response to that is a shrug, then he will say, well, I guess no one really is going to stop me. And he will continue pulling the law in that very dark and dangerous direction.
So well said. And also, not the irony, the danger of a judge acting with impunity on the eve of potentially instilling in the next president, potentially Donald Trump, absolute immunity. I mean, the idea of a representative democracy appearing to dissolve before our very eyes. And, Mark brings up, and you bring up, the infusion of Christian nationalism. When you look at what's happening in Congress, you look at what's happening in the legislative branch, vis-a-vis the Republican Party, you look what's happening in the judicial branch, 2 of the 3 branches of our government have become, hotbeds of Christian fundamentalism.
Well, right. And I think that the same thing will follow the executive branch if Donald Trump is reelected, because, he already has plans to bring in a whole entourage of people. I mean, Donald Trump is, not a practicing Christian, although he might be a Christian nationalist in terms of his beliefs in kind of who should be privileged in our society. But he has plans to remake, or the people around him have plans to remake the entire executive branch. And this is just a kind of tiny example, a symbolic example of what that looks like. It's it's just completely unaccountable. Maybe we had norms and standards before, but, you and what army is going to enforce them?
Mark, this, in the context of the broader history of the court, this has been the project of the right wing since Ronald Reagan. And
yes.
What is so astounding and to some degree appalling is the way in which it is in full flower, 40 years later, a dedicated effort to reverse social progress, dissolve the barrier between church and state, and see a right-wing takeover of the judiciary. It almost seems complete on a night like this.
Absolutely. And I think the great lesson that the Reagan administration imparted on some of its younger foot soldiers like Mitch McConnell, who are now leading the Republican Party, is if you capture the courts, you don't even have to win elections. Passing laws through democracy is really unwieldy. It takes forever. It's expensive. And those laws can be repealed. Those lawmakers can be voted out. But when a judge does it, well, if you can't get that overturned on appeal because the Supreme Court has been captured as well, that's just the law of the land. And it it may stay that way for decades. This has indeed been the project, and it does feel on a night like tonight like the project has succeeded. But I'll say, for many decades, the conservative legal movement felt that they were failing. It took them nearly 50 years to overturn Roe. A lot of progressives might be dispirited today, but if they aren't playing the long game, then they really aren't playing to win at all.